In the last 20 years, international bidders have been making huge investments into English football via the Premier League and the EFL. The investments up until this point have been made for a number of reasons, such as allowing incredibly wealthy individuals to move money or create a masthead by which they want to be known. More recently, however, we have seen even greater investment, but for an increasingly singular reason. There is profit to be made, meaning that despite the already eye-watering finance associated with English football clubs, they are considered by these investors currently as undervalued assets. But why would this be such a profitable venture now, when previously this was nothing but a money pit for owners often acting as philanthropists? What opportunities are these owners seeing, and what gives them confidence that the future they have bought into will become a reality? And what does it tell us about the changes that will be introduced to the game as a result of this increased investment and influence? A European Super League has been rejected but looms large in the background. The Premier League have just bought the international rights to the FA Cup. Middle Eastern investment into sport continues to grow, and celebrity owners of lower league clubs are reshaping their audience appeal and business models. Things are changing fast, and investment from the Middle East is well documented. However, it is the US that holds the key to the transformations of the English game that will take place in the coming years. This is a deep dive into the scenarios that await the game and why, regardless of the path that unfolds, it will be the football club's ability to act as a media company that will allow them to harness the modern world that awaits us all. I can appreciate no one really wants to talk too much about the worldwide pandemic back in 2020, but this is, for the purpose of this piece, a good place to start. While there had been plenty of investors who entered into the English game years before that, it was the financial crisis brought on by COVID that alerted more investors to the opportunity of buying into football club ownership. The main source of this investment came from, and continues to come from, America, so much so that it is reported that 1/4 of Premier League and EFL clubs have some sort of American ownership, and it is this rapidly increasing American influence and the American sports model itself that gives an indicator as to where the sport is heading. COVID enabled investors to buy cheaper, no doubt, but that reason alone isn't compelling enough to entice investors into what is traditionally a very difficult way of making money. The pandemic acted as an accelerator, but what else is driving this investment? One factor, which is also likely one of the most significant, is the continued upward trend in the value of international Premier League broadcast rights. For those unfamiliar with this, the Premier League sells the rights to broadcasters all over the world so they can air the live games and highlights. The rights are designated and sold by territory. So, for instance, there will be US rights, Brazilian rights, German rights, and so on and so forth, with broadcasters in each of these territories able to bid to show the Premier League content exclusively in that region. The price of these rights, like in any industry, certainly in a capitalist country, is determined by the demand in each of the territories. In the UK, the price of the rights, while still astronomical, have plateaued and are held by Sky, BT Sport and Amazon, with the latest deal renegotiated at the same price as the previous one. The signs are that these rights have reached what broadcasters are willing to pay for them, certainly in the short term. However, it is the international rights where the Premier League is now seeing growth, and for the first time the international rights were sold for more than the domestic UK rights. Growth in Asia helped fuel this, but it is the growth in the Americas that is particularly noteworthy, with the price doubling since the last deal due to the increased demand in the region. More than that, the view from the US investors is that there is plenty of headroom for continued growth, particularly in the United States. It goes without saying the US is a huge market in its own right, of course. It has traditionally been known as the one to crack, in inverted commas, for many industries. The Premier League, no doubt, buoyed by this traction internationally, have earmarked the US, China and India as their main growth targets, presumably because of their gigantic populations. However, the US has what is known as a far higher ARPU, or average revenue per user. It is a richer economy with a population expecting to spend large amounts of surplus cash on media and entertainment. So just to give an example of this in real terms, about 85% of US households purchase at least one streaming service. The figure for other developed markets, such as the UK, is closer to about 56%. US citizens also subscribe to an average of 4 streaming services per household, while in the UK, the number is closer to 2 per household. When you then take into account the added size of the US population, you start to get a better picture of the opportunity that exists in the US. And while the NFL sells its rights for more than any other sports franchise in the world, despite real interest being limited almost exclusively to the US. So while the Premier League likely feel they cannot afford to not have a presence in the Indian and Chinese markets longer term, the US market is ripe for expansion and increased monetization now, and this is critical to its longer term prosperity as an organisation. I mention streaming particularly because this aspect holds increasingly more significance here. The Premier League, like many sporting associations and franchises, are continually weighing up whether to go D2C or direct to consumer. Now, what does this mean? Instead of selling the rights to broadcasters who then charge subscribers to watch the games, the Premier League will show the games themselves via their own streaming service and charge a subscription directly from the viewer. There is a tipping point coming as to when it becomes more profitable for the Premier League to do this. The tipping point will arrive at different times depending on the territory. One of the main factors to keep in mind here is that a big advantage of selling the rights to broadcasters is that these organisations already have huge reach within the territory and established marketing systems to get the product to the wider population. This is far from insignificant and one of the main reasons, particularly in a territory like the US, why the Premier League will likely remain coy about doing this anytime soon, even if in theory it could be more profitable. However, this is a possibility in smaller territories where the Premier League may test a D2C product and needs to be priced into longer term thinking for the clubs themselves. Now, with the US market being so significant, it stands to reason that the best people to take advantage of this are, of course, people with the finance, but also with prior knowledge of running sporting franchises in the US. The vast majority of US owners, certainly in the Premier League, already own sports clubs in the States and will feel they know exactly what is required to unlock more value in the market, value that may arrive via a number of forms. We have already seen an attempt to start a European Super League. Some say this was a disaster and some say it was an opening gambit that will pave the way for better traction in the future. What is clear from US owners particularly is that they regard the possibility of relegation as a major drawback in the perceived value of football clubs. Unlike in the US, where sporting franchises remain in the league no matter how they perform, limiting any damage to a brand by on-field failure. Stefan Szymanski, author of Soccernomics, explained the US outlook on sports with this quote: "They, US sports, have an awful lot of revenue sharing and mechanisms to limit salaries that are paid out to the players. Because the teams operate cooperatively, because it doesn't matter where you come in the league, your sporting success doesn't matter. You're just in the business of making money." This also rings true when you notice the value of US sports franchises over the years, all of whom, even the badly underperforming ones, have grown their market value exponentially. A European Super League would offer the safety American investors are used to, but of course is at odds with how football traditionally is run, to put it lightly. Not only does the increased US investment in the game make this sort of development more likely, but clubs like Real Madrid, worried that they will get left behind due to the influx of huge investment into the Premier League, are also right behind this and are no doubt pushing this along behind the scenes. Now, any sort of Super League would of course be catastrophic for the Premier League and is designed specifically to shift the power from one to the other. This will partly explain why the Premier League has earmarked India and China as priorities for the future, so as to increase its influence globally and help protect it from these kinds of attacks. But this on its own will not act as a deterrent to any Super League in the short term. Time is ticking and the Premier League needs to do something. This is why the Premier League's purchase of the international rights to the FA Cup is particularly interesting, and something I was half expecting, although not necessarily in this exact form. It has been met with a dim view by many media commentators, asking why the FA would sell the rights to an organisation like the Premier League, who wants to only deprioritise it in the calendar in favour of their own product. But there may be something more significant going on here. Now that the FA have given the green light to this transaction, it could be the precursor to the Premier League buying the rights to the entire EFL. But why would the Premier League want to do this? It would, after all, infuriate football fans. However, looking at this through an American investor's lens and by proxy the Premier League's strategic lens, it makes sense on a number of levels. Firstly, if you are able to package up, for want of a better description, the entire English Football League, it would soften the blow of relegation as the team would still remain within the franchise, therefore becoming more attractive to US investors and increasing the value of the clubs. Another point to make is that many young players from places like the US could be blooded in the lower leagues but under the Premier League banner, creating more interest throughout the American population. Consider that this pre-season Leeds were scheduled to take part in a tournament in the US on behalf of the Premier League. Leeds were withdrawn from this when it became clear they might get relegated and would no longer be a Premier League team, which duly happened. Leeds were no doubt put forward for this originally because of the US team members on their playing staff. An integration with the wider EFL would eradicate these scenarios and allow more opportunities for growth stateside. The fact that the Premier League acquired FA Cup rights is telling in this sense, and the fact that the FA were willing to do such a deal may well lay the foundations for this wider move into the EFL. This would be highly criticised and for many good reasons. The reality, however, may be a choice between this and a European Super League. Either way, one can start to appreciate how the Premier League is looking to defend itself against ideas like a European Super League by appeasing the investors from the US. The idea of appealing to the US population via US players sets a precedent for a much wider topic. How do clubs engage with the fans or the end user? But there are more pertinent questions that arise off the back of this. How do you create new fans? And perhaps most interestingly of all, how do you monetize people who aren't even fans of the games at all? US owners will believe that all of these things are possible based on the sporting franchises they already run in America, where lifestyle products heavily overlap with sporting institutions, undamaged by poor on-field performance, as we mentioned before. What we are talking about here, first and foremost, are brands. From this perspective particularly, there is an entire new market to tap into, with the North Star being to create mainstream brands that are based on football teams that appeal to non-football fans. This will of course be aided by American players, but it may be the case that, a little like Formula One, the league is sold as a concept, meaning fans will be enthusiasts of the Premier League rather than a particular club necessarily. With football or soccer being played at a young age in the US, this may be viable as people view it as a wholesome pastime for children and something of a positive outlook on things like fitness, youth and team concept. So there is that angle. But when we talk about cutting through to new audiences, we really need to look no further than Wrexham, who are appealing to non-football fans in the US. World Soccer Talk website made the observation when running an article on the subject, asking the question, why are people following a 5th Division Wales team when they don't watch the team in their own backyard? This is a classic case of creating a narrative that connects with the audience so that they care. In the show, Rob McElhenney explains the parallels between his youth growing up in Philadelphia and Wrexham, the value of tight-knit community, and ultimately laying the ground for an underdog story many people, not just from Philadelphia, can relate to. The show, Welcome to Wrexham, goes to great pains to emphasise these things constantly throughout the show. What you also see is the team being added to the FIFA game and the club campaigning to get National League games streamed worldwide. Again, very aware of the role media has to play in their future. It also goes without saying, sponsorship and merchandise revenues are also, of course, well up. Wrexham have also landed a pre-season friendly with Manchester United in the States before the 2023-24 season, showing the notoriety the club now possesses in America. But if we dig a little deeper here, the signing of Ben Foster in particular is noticeable. In an interview, Foster mentioned that he did not really need the money and that Wrexham were paying him peanuts. While this is likely very true, it is a stretch to think that he joined purely on account of his love of the game. He could have come out of retirement and gone anywhere in the lower leagues if that was the case. Much of Foster's personal focus in the last few years has been his YouTube channel, and since becoming part of the Wrexham story, this has ballooned in popularity, making him an owner of a substantial media outlet, such as the popularity of his work. Because of Wrexham's non-league status during the last season, Foster was exempt from rules that professional clubs must adhere to, such as using body cams and GoPros during a game. This is just an example of how Wrexham were actively looking for ways to exploit content, making a contract for Foster worthwhile despite the lack of pay packet, while at the same time gaining more fans across the world. This is all possible because Wrexham have created a narrative that has captured the imagination of football and non-football fans alike. As the US influence in the game grows, clubs will need to plug into new audiences in similar ways, and generating content like this will be key. This ability to appeal to the casual football fan is something Todd Boehly has referred to when talking about areas for opportunity in the English game. Something he mentioned particularly was the ground itself. In an interview with Bloomberg in 2019, Boehly said, "The new stadiums that English clubs are building, they're starting to take an American approach to stadiums and making them environments," he said. "They were very utilitarian historically, but now they're starting to think of them as lifestyle." Lifestyle is the key term here. This is a nod to the potential of monetizing new and casual fans via a brand they want to be associated with. Again, to feed this monetization, the clubs must have a strong relationship with the audience they wish to attract. Like Wrexham, they have to make them care. So it's clear that there are some moving parts here. The thing to remember is that continued investment is going to keep coming, and US investment particularly is going to look to exploit the value the clubs hold. Sooner or later, there will be enough influence to see change happen within the game, and when the dam breaks, we will find ourselves in a different place. The growing value of media rights, the prospect of direct-to-consumer streaming, and the opportunity to monetize new audiences will keep the investment coming. What we are likely to see as a result of that is the abolition or softening of relegation in either the European Super League or a larger Premier League franchise format that encompasses the EFL. For investors to get behind this plan, they will want to be reassured that the clubs can garner a relationship with new segments of fans, and producing new types of content to push their narrative will be key. The potential exploitation of the US market is the reason the owners in many cases are there and are predicated on the ability to be able to do these things. So, in summation, the powers that be have some decisions to make. The selling of FA Cup rights to the Premier League seems significant in this regard and has, it seems, fired a starting gun for the next evolution of the beautiful game. An evolution that will be a charm offensive and change the way we watch, talk and feel about a sport that sort of unbelievably is about to get bigger. Thanks once again for watching this video. I hope that was enjoyable. I will be putting some more up in the close future, so stay tuned. Subscribe and like if you enjoyed it and all that sort of thing. Thank you once again, and I look forward to seeing you next time.